Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. I recently got a question from a viewer regarding underspins and spinnerbaits and whether they were completely interchangeable or if there is a time I prefer to throw a spinnerbait versus an underspin. And the baits are very, very similar in characteristics, but I do think there's a specific time and place where a spinnerbait is better than throwing an underspin, and vice versa. There's times where an underspin is better than throwing a spinnerbait. But having said that, I also believe that a lot of times they are very interchangeable, meaning you could choose one or the other and you're probably going to catch the same number of fish. But I want to break this down for you because I do think it's a good question that the viewer asked. We're just going to talk about the differences. The biggest difference to me is blade positioning. So with an underspin, the blade is underneath the bait versus a spinnerbait where the blade is on top. Now that has two big differences to me. The first is your flash. So if the blade is under the body, your flash is under the body. So what that's going to do is it's going to draw more attention to the flash versus the bait itself. So to me, that has more draw power for fish that are looking up. So an underspin to me is generally a bait where I'd rather fish it above the fish. That's one of the reasons why it's a good bait for suspending fish. So you've got flash, and that full flash is not interrupted by the bait. With a spinnerbait, you have the flash above the skirt material, and if you've got a trailer. And generally what that means is if the fish are looking up, they're not going to see the flash nearly as good as they are because it's being interrupted by the skirt. Now, to me, a spinnerbait's draw power is better for fish that are more parallel to it, meaning you're working the bait at roughly the same depth as the fish. And from that standpoint, they're seeing the full flash of the blade because they're more looking horizontal at it versus looking straight up at the bait. So that's the biggest difference to me, is those two. The other thing I want to point out is based on where your blade is at, an underspin is generally going to be not weedless at all, but because your blade is above the hook on your spinnerbait, that actually acts as a weed guard, and you can fish a spinnerbait through some pretty heavy cover. Other than that, you're looking at pretty similar characteristics, except for the fact that your underspin is going to have much less vibration, still going to be less flash, and generally speaking, it's going to be a bait that you fish much slower through the water column. These small blades generally take very, very little movement to get to move versus a spinnerbait, which a lot of times you're fishing at a faster pace because you need to keep it moving to keep the blades moving. Those are going to be your basic differences. Now you can get spinnerbaits that are much smaller. You can get underspins these days that have multiple blades attached, so you really can get them to be much more like each other. An underspin with a lot of blades starts looking a lot more like a spinnerbait. But when it comes to fishing these, because, and we're going to stick just with the underspin, because the underspin is much more of a finesse presentation, I generally prefer to fish this, like I said, for suspended fish. So I'm going to be fishing this through the middle part of the water column. And I'm going to be fishing this a lot of times in clear water because it's not giving off as much vibration, because it doesn't have as much flash. The draw power is not as good as a spinnerbait. But in clear water, you don't need a lot of vibration. You don't need a lot of flash because the fish can actually see it. They can find it from further away. So I'll generally fish these in clear water. The other thing I want to point out is, for me, because it is a much slower presentation, I generally tend to fish these in cooler water temperatures as well. I'll catch a lot of fish on these in water temps that are all the way down into the low 40s. I generally don't tend to throw a spinnerbait in water temps that are much lower than low 50s. But it also comes down to profile. An underspin a lot of times does a good job at mimicking an individual lone bait fish. That makes it for an easy target. A lot of times your lone bait fish are ones that are, they're struggling. They're kind of just out there swimming around. They don't have the safety of being in a big school of bait fish. Makes them an easy target for bass. And from that standpoint, that's kind of what I'm going for when I'm mimicking, when I'm throwing an underspin to mimic an isolated fish. But generally speaking, deeper, clear water, cooler water temperatures, much more of a finesse presentation. The spinnerbait for me is going to be more about power fishing, more about trying to create reaction strikes. So in this case, this is more of that easy meal the fish just can't turn down. A spinnerbait is more about creating a lot of flash, creating a lot of movement that's going to generate reaction strikes from the fish. So you're targeting fish that may not be as aggressive, but you're trying to trigger them more with your pulsing of the spinnerbait and your movements with the rod. But because it's more weedless, I'm going to be fishing this around grass, standing timber, any sort of cover where I can bump this off the object to try to create reaction strikes. I'm going to be fishing it in generally, like I said, slightly warmer water temperatures. I'm going to be fishing it in more off-colored water. I'm not a huge fan of throwing spinnerbaits in really clear water. Yes, it can work, but generally speaking, I need to have some strong wind, some water movement. I don't like throwing it in flat, calm conditions. I would much rather throw a single swim bait in those conditions. So for me, a spinnerbait is much more about off-colored water, not necessarily muddied. I just want some color to it. I do like having some water movement, whether that's current or whether that's wave action from wind, but I like to have something that's going to break up the movement. I also think a spinnerbait does a better job at trying to mimic a small school of bait fish. It's got more blades, a little bit bigger size. It kind of gives the look of it being multiple bait fish versus just a single bait fish. But because the flash is on top of the bait, I generally like to fish this in shallower water as well. There are times I will slow roll a spinnerbait in really deep water, but even then I like to bump it off the bottom versus having it way up above the fish to draw them up to it. In those instances, I would rather go with an underspin. But those are kind of the times and places, got it stuck on me, where I choose one over the other. Generally speaking, it comes down to water color, comes down to water temperature, it comes down to where it is that I'm fishing for the bass. So yes, I could go get an underspin that's weedless, but generally speaking, if I'm fishing shoreline cover or thicker cover, I like to go with the spinnerbait. If I'm fishing more suspended fish that are out in the middle of nowhere, maybe they're around standing timber, maybe around or over a brush pile, maybe I've just got fish that are suspended around bait, that's when I prefer to go with your underspin like this guy here. Both of them great baits, both of them proven fish catchers. Generally speaking, you're probably not going to choose poorly if you're using either one of them, but there is a time and a place where one will outshine the other. So hopefully this video kind of helped you break down when you might want to throw a spinnerbait over an underspin and vice versa. For me, like I said, they are big players in my overall arsenal, and I throw them both a lot. So I have full confidence in them. Hopefully you guys do too. Let me know in the comment section. Maybe I missed something. If there's a time and a place where you prefer to throw one over the other, leave it as a comment so others can learn from you as well. Otherwise, guys, if you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Stay tuned, new video coming out tomorrow.